Welcome to Renaissance Charge videos. I'm Rick Friedrich. Today I just want to give you a couple updates and about the convention coming up, and also talk about the 4 productions that I've produced over the last 6 years, in order to understand kind of a progression if you want to study the things that I've been teaching. So first, on the convention, I have other commitments for July, so I wasn't able to focus on doing another meeting this month, June. Everybody's asking about it. I thought I might be able to do it, but I wasn't able to. So the earliest would be sometime in August. And for anyone who's asked, I'll get back to you personally about it. Anyway, over the years, I've done various things for the general public, and the last 6 years I've done 4 major projects or productions. So I'm just going to recap on those just a little bit. You can see the introduction video for the first one, which is this idea of the selfish circuits or loving paths. Now these are still on the website somewhere, all this information. And I just want to draw attention to a couple of things here. But if you're wanting to study the things in the order, it is pretty much a chronological order. So we're going to talk about this for a moment, and then we'll go on to the second and third and fourth. So in a normal circuit that you're used to, you have a closed loop. You have a source charge, which is a battery or whatever. And then you have a load across it. And everybody thinks that the load consumes the energy. But according to conventional theory, actually, that can't be the case. Well, conventional theory in physics is contradictory, and it's false in many different ways. So actually, if we're talking about electron flow from the battery, it works from the negative to the positive, and the charges go through and neutralize, right? They balance out. They go from a high concentration on the negative plate on a fully charged battery or a capacitor, and they discharge back to the positive terminal through the load. So the load is not consuming the energy. It's not making the battery discharged. It's the loop that is discharging the battery. Now you might say again that that's all. What's the point of even saying that? What difference does it make? Well, it makes a big difference, because if the load determines the losses in the circuit or the discharging, then we can't have free energy. We can't have any extra energy produced. But as a matter of fact, we can. And so that whole theory is wrong. The whole idea, the load is a side effect. The output from the load is a side effect of the electron flow. So that's very fundamental to realize. the big distinction there. So this is what I talked about back in 2016 when I presented this first. So what happens is when we have what we call a many-body concept, where we open up, or what you could call floating ground. When we open up the circuit, in this case, instead of it being a closed loop here, we open up the circuit, we charge another battery, we run another load, and in the motor systems that we've sold over the years, we've been able to do, on the basic level, charging one battery at the rate of the other one discharging. So obviously this load and this load is not consuming the energy. Somehow we've got two batteries, or we have two forms of work being done at the same time. So the whole theory is wrong, the whole understanding is twisted. It's not my objective to get into that. You can watch that series and get into it. But I wanted to say that if you want to study what I've been doing, that's the place to start. That's why I put that on the introduction. So then there's a couple of papers here that I have handed out, like this one showing you the closed loop, the light bulb. So the light bulb doesn't consume the energy, because you could put an ammeter on either side and see the same amperage. It's not consuming the energy, it's actually controlling the rate of current flow, and that's it. And yet it produces a side effect of light. If you substitute a resistor with a light bulb of the same resistance or impedance, you'll end up having the same amount of heat, but you also have light with the light bulb. Same thing with the inductor. The inductor, in the place of the light bulb here, will produce magnetism as well as heat. Now, in the circuit that we just showed you here, not only do we have magnetism to drive a motor, but we have heat from the resistance, but we also have battery charging. So we have three forms of energy. So if the resistor is the equivalent, the amount of heat produced is the equivalent of the energy being used in the circuit, then how can you have magnetism and battery charging in addition? It doesn't add up. So I've shown various circuits going more and more advanced in this teaching over the years. Like this is what we called the second. So we had basically 4-stage process. Never really came up with a fifth one. And it wasn't really that I had a special name. Stage 1 was the basic circuit, right? Stage 2 was this concept. You still had the basic circuit here charging a second battery because of the inductor or the motor coil. But here we have a third battery bank. In this case I'm showing a solar input charging a battery like you'd normally have. This is the controller, but now I'm charging this battery here. So that would be the second stage process. The third was doing something across the output to the charging battery right here, where this red line is, where we're actually doing the same thing as we did in the basic circuit, but doing it again and again and again and again. And while you can do it on a basic level, the real meaning of that third stage is a resonance circuit, and that we can multiply it out again and again and again, infinitely, if you had enough parts. And that's because of the negative path. It's a negative resistance path, and because it's a resonance circuit. And I've handed out at my meetings a diagram from Tesla's True Wireless, and that is actually in the next production. The whole article is published in this book, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, figure 5 was a very small diagram, so I exploded it in a bigger my own diagram, where I took those and then I added the secondaries to them because it's implied from figure 10 in the True Wireless. And then you can understand some of your options in the third stage process. Now that's what I've left everybody to do for themselves. And that's where I'll leave it for various reasons. I don't have a product for the general public for that particular process, even though everybody wants it. I like to see people apply the things that have been taught. They've been taught, rather than just wait for somebody to give them a handout. Anyway, that's another subject, another story. Now the fourth stage process was a similar place to do the third stage process, but this time it's on the input side before the inductor. This is basically what Benitez was doing in one of his patents, Carlos Benitez, and that's a whole project in itself that kind of parallels this selfish circuits teaching. And Benitez had a transformer before the induction coil. In his case, he wasn't running a motor. So he had a well, he didn't say that it was resonance, but it's presumed to be a resonance transformer in series on the series path. Now we have the MIC kit, which is just simply a coil and a ferrite rod and another coil around that, or just the wire. You can wind it yourself, and that is an interesting experiment in itself. So those are the four stages to that selfish circuits loving paths. And again, the whole idea is selfish person consumes the gifts that God has given them upon themselves and doesn't multiply them out as they originally intended. God's grace was meant to share. So a loving person finds ways of multiplying the loaves and the fishes, so to speak. And so I had all these different spiritual analogies to that. But in the same way, a circuit that we have been taught to use, that's, you could call it inefficient, or whatever, however you want to look at it, is only giving you losses in which you have to pay with blood, sweat, and tears to pay the bills to make that energy. But God didn't make things like that. We go back to Tesla. Tesla did look at the creation and try and learn from it the processes that God created. The transhumanist people, which actually Tesla was also more like a transhumanist person too. But anyway, the transhumanist agenda is to improve upon God's ways contrary to his ways, which is really the devil's agenda. When you want to know really the bottom line of all the heart of the conspiracies of the world, is simply the devil's agenda to disprove God, to get people to not think about God, not praise God, thank God, appreciate God, have communion with God. What it is, they want, and the devil wants you, and his people want you to save yourself or have them save you. But they don't really want to save you, they want to destroy you and use you. But the point is, you have two different kingdoms and two different ways of thinking. And so in the energy world, medical world, entertainment world, religious world today, all these different parts of society, of our culture, you have the same evil agenda to displace God with something else. And that's the ideas in electrical thinking as well. Not that people necessarily consciously do that or think that when they are using that circuitry. But those who have controlled the education and the whole teaching, the whole industry for the general public, have deliberately done this to make you a slave, to make you in a way that God did not create you to be. So that's the whole thing, the bottom line teaching that I've been trying to counter in many different ways in that first one. So moving on to the Resonance Induction Coupler Kit, which just happens to spell my name Rick. I didn't come up with that. This was done long before I even knew about it. But anyway, needless to say, it's Rick Kit 1, and then we'll talk about Rick Kit 2 as the fourth production. So again, this was taken from what Don Smith recommended. We're going to talk about him next in this third production. So the Resonance Induction Coupler Kit Don recommended to start with. So it was simply the two coils. You could see some of the coils here. Oops, in the picture. You can see them on the website. And he recommended learning the basics of resonance induction coupling, and we'll talk about specifically his works next. But so what I did is we got the original kit, and then what we did was enlarge upon it, and of course it became much more than I was ever intending. Same with the second kit. And so we created a learning tool. What I realized working in the free energy world, probably with more people than anybody else working in the free energy world, because I'm constantly on the phone with people all over the world. And I talked to all these people in the groups and ran groups for years, tens of thousands of people that I've been in correspondence with all over the world. And what I realized is that people had a lot of words in their head. They had this foggy view of resonance. So what I did is made a kit where you could work with resonance in many different ways and get a feel for the subtleties of things, because that's what was missing. Everybody was kind of in a kind of two-dimensional world perspective, and so they weren't looking at the whole environment. They didn't realize the environmental factors, the subtle things, the changes, and even especially the grounding, what grounding really was. Now this didn't really get into it directly, but it paved the way for the second book, which we'll talk about. Second kit. So what I did was, I was never really intending to teach on over unity, but it was inevitable. In these systems, we can easily create many times the output of what you put into it. Now, that wasn't the primary purpose. In fact, the title, which I've never actually mentioned unless you bought the kit, is a very long title. This will tell you what it's about. Resonance Induction Coupler Kit, in the unlimited open context of crafting true negative resistance by triggering sharp disruptive discharges through low resistance impedances, amplifying and reciprocating with sympathetic resonance in freely reactive multi-body dynamic networks. Now, these were all kind of subjects that I touched upon in this book. And so what I ended up doing was focusing on themes. As I was writing this, I realized, and over the years I realized, that people needed to understand processes and themes and subjects rather than fixating on a particular setup, because they don't really understand how to approach a setup. They don't know what they're dealing with. So I've been teaching for the last 6, 7, 8 years on these processes of principles, free energy, which Tom Bieran's book was supposed to be about that, but it never really accomplished that in a way that people could really clearly, definitively understand. So what I ended up doing was making a 2-part book, very basic, in this kit, very basic experiments, and then having extensive endnotes, which was the second part of the book, which was probably 3/4 of the book, fine print, which gets more advanced, so that you can go back and learn and learn and learn more and more. So it was just kind of, became open-ended, and I covered quite a bit of different things in here. So as far as I'm aware, everyone who's bought this kit, I've never had any negative feedback from it. Everybody's been very happy with it, and I'm very satisfied. I mean, there could always be more improvements in that, but what it did is help people have a tool to learn resonance, and then of course go off into all these related subjects. And I've had so many people say, you know, it's exactly the point. I just never really experienced, like, you can have basic resonance and still have a foggy idea of it, but when you dig into these experiments and looking at it from different angles, and then, you know, really experiencing the geometry, just the total environmental 3D atmosphere, then it starts to peel away at the misinformation that you've been brought up with or limited to by. So that was the first resonance kit. Moving on to the third production, Don Smith book. Now, I had no intention of making a Don Smith book at all, but several things happened that led me to this. One of them, and I mentioned this all in the book, one of them was Patrick Kelly's, who's passed away now. He had this book on free energy that misrepresented Don Smith, as well as many other inventors, which I believe was a deliberate attempt to cause confusion, overwhelm you with too much information, and then mix it all up with various opinions, diverting, changing the words. He actually changed the words. And so this was very unfortunate. And I watched the various groups, the energetic whatever forum, deliberate attempt to smear Don Smith and lead people astray. And then all these other forums. Some of them I thought initially were good. But anyway, none of them had any. Now these forums were all done some years after Don Smith was around. So what happened was people in the last 20 years were not really, like, who have been at this research, didn't realize that there was two primary videos that Don Smith presented in 94 and 95. And so they were starting with the third video and going from there. And so they didn't have the core information, nor did they have all the information that he had in his booklets. So one of my customers at the end of one of my meetings just brought up the fact that he was friends with Don, was in his home, and got all this information, went to the early meetings where you see in the videos. And he actually gave me several of the videos, and then I transcribed them and put them eventually in this book. And he gave me all sorts of other information that warranted publication, along the lines with clearing up the misinformation from people like Patrick Kelly and those who run the forums like Aaron Murakami, who allowed this misinformation to circulate. Now, I found that Don Smith probably did more for the free energy, gave us more useful information, and did more for the free energy movement than anybody else in history, as far as my research goes. And that includes more than Tesla. You could say, well, Tesla paved the way, but Tesla was not interested in giving the general public free energy. He didn't really make an effort. He had some real bad attitudes. He wasn't a good man. So it's not so obvious with Tesla systems. You might find a few quotes here and there. You can look at other individuals that have given substantial contributions, but Don went out of his way when he didn't have to, in his retirement years, to help people. Even his own son didn't share his vision, and ended up, honoring his father's wishes and bringing him out to help people learn this. But you can see there that he didn't have to do that. You know, he was making big deals, and but he shared this information, which was tremendously useful. So when I got a hold of this extra information and saw the hodgepodge of floating information all around, and I remembered when Don said, you know, one of these days I'm going to have a 400-page book, and it's going to be color, and it's going to be really nice. And so we made it 500 pages. So I think he would be proud if he was still around of this work. I'm satisfied with it. It's got a lot of mistakes in it that are my fault, and maybe one day I can get around to fixing them. So you have to bear with it. It is what it is. I spent a long time working on this. Anyway, this revived the research of Don Smith and all those various systems. But you wouldn't see that on the forums. The forums don't reflect any. There was never a resurgence, because those forums are controlled by the establishment. I don't know how exactly, but I know that Bedini and that group of people were part of that too. And all these people control the information. They overwhelm you with too much information. They don't make it plain and simple. They add all this drama to it, right? They distract you. Anything. It's very sophisticated. You don't realize the tricks that they pull. Anyway, so I put this together, put about a year of my life into this. And that, you know, goes back before I started working on this book specifically, but I spent a lot of time on this. I built many of the systems in this book, which I've never shown anybody, some of them. So I was not going to publish something that I wasn't aware of. Now, every single system that Don presents here, that there's enough information to replicate, I have found out to be true. In other words, I haven't replicated everything in this book, but everything that I have attempted to replicate from Don has worked out just like he said. And that's just my testimony. I'm not expecting you to believe it. I'm just telling you that's what I experienced. So that's why I published it. I put it together because I know that Don knew what he was talking about. And yeah, people stumble at some of the things he said, some of the mistakes he made, which every meeting I've had, I've made the same kind of verbal mistakes at times. And, you know, both of us didn't cross our T's all the time, and we're trying to be more down to earth, I guess you could say. And I think that Don Smith would be like the ultimate grandfather, that, you know, when you think about him, you're a young man, you're going to see your grandfather, and he's going to tinker around with things and show you stuff, and that's the way I kind of look at him. He was that kind of guy, old school. Now, I don't know him personally, but I've had quite a few customers now that knew him personally, that were at those meetings and saw in the suitcase. Anyway, that's another whole subject. So this book gives you all the information that Don published to the general public that I could find at the time. There's a little bit more now that's not in this book, but and there is some in here that he didn't actually publish to the general public. And I was leaving it at that. I had no interest in interfering with his family or, you know, going down that road. I wanted to honor the family by producing this, and I think they would be happy with it. Anyway, what it is transcribed. There's all the information that Don published in the books, because there were several of them, and he changed them around from year to year. And then you have the website information, and then you have all the emails. And nobody had pulled that all together until I did. There was some other stuff floating around that had many of the emails, but I did a thorough research on that. It took me a long time to sort through and put some of the context in. That's probably some of the most important information in this book. Then I also transcribed all the videos, and by playing them slowly and typing them out, I realized how much I missed, about 5% of what he said, because I had to clearly understand every word, which was not always easy to determine. So it was really useful. So that's all in here, and then I organized everything in an index, in several indexes, put the information together. That's why I call it the Don Smith Magnetic Resonance Energy Crafting Systematic Index. So it kind of systematically goes through various ways of looking at this information. So moving on from that, now this wasn't designed to be a parts list, a how-to kit, right? The first kit was like that. The second kit is that. This was to give you everything that Don presented and to organize it. That's all I could accomplish there. Now there is quite a bit of information that you could do that with in here, but it wasn't always, a lot of it's not thorough unless you look at the whole picture here. Now I'll say one more thing about Don. Don was really presenting these things to the more advanced free energy community, and basically assuming that you had kind of like a ham radio knowledge base, experience base. So for those of you, which I'm finding most people in the free energy community now are either engineers or completely unfamiliar with electronics, or have very basic electronics knowledge. And so this, you're not going to really get very far with this. That's why I started the first kit, so that you can start along that path. So the problem with people is that they're coming to this without that basic knowledge. They haven't watched the videos, and that's why people failed. They didn't understand the grounding, even though Don did cover it. Someone posted the other day on my YouTube channel that this Don was vague about grounding. Well, no, he wasn't. He was very, very detailed. He described everything, but he didn't always have to repeat himself 5 times for you to understand or listen to that point. And so I'm just saying, if you want to learn this, there's some basic understanding that you have to have. And that brings me to the next and final production. I should say too, I did produce all the battery chargers with Renaissance. Going green saves you money. And that was another whole thing that I did years ago in producing the battery chargers that allow you to keep your batteries. But that's not really my point in this video, to talk about those kinds of things. Now the final production was what has recently come out this year. It's called the Resonance Induction Coupler Kit 2, Earth and Air Ground Open Circuits with distributed resonators set free from forced decaying oscillations. There's a little bit of humor in that one. So what this came about, which I had not planned on doing this, like I had not planned on any of these things. In fact, everything I've been doing for the last 30 years, 31 years since I became a Christian, has all been kind of special order, ministry oriented, and people asked for it, and so I produced it. All the products that I sell are because people asked or even demanded them. So this kind of came about in the same way. It's part of the grounding research that I've been doing for years, and it's an extension of the Kit 1. The Kit 1, I was trying to avoid people hurting themselves, so I didn't really talk about a direct earth-ground connection, because you could get really hurt when you start doing even a small circuit. So I tried to avoid that, but I paved the way for understanding grounding. Now in this kit, what I do is I have three progressive chapters that progress from one chapter to the next. So everybody wants the Tesla coil, free energy Tesla coil, or the real Tesla coil. So in this kit, what I do is I realize that people, even after reading and watching the videos, they still didn't get the very basics of static electricity. They still didn't get the many bodies concept that I talked about and introduced in both production 1 and 2, Seltzer circuits and the Resonance Kit 1. So I wanted to go back earlier, or I wanted to go back to the basics from another angle. Now, what I could have added in this would be the whole Seltzer circuits concept, but it's really implied in the electrostatics. So I start off with the basic physics, and I give reference to online courses on the subject, on the related subjects, paving the way to understand atmospheric energy, charging, and energetics, energy production from the atmosphere. So starting off with the first chapter, learning how electron flows, and encouraging everybody to pay attention to the details, because I say once you get later on into this, when you go into this book later on, you'll realize that you weren't actually paying attention, both in your physics class when you first learned this stuff in high school or college, but also when you were reading it again in here. So what I was trying to point out was that your teachers don't teach you to, they're not really teaching you, they're getting you to memorize things and pass a course. They're not really making you live it. They're not making you consider all the implications, because it would lead to free energy when you understand it. So I go into the basics, then I start interjecting different things throughout that, and then we get into lightning, the state-of-the-art science of lightning, how lightning works. And in fact, when you think about positive and negative ground to cloud cycling, that's the Don Smith grounding system right there, which is what I get into here. So does lightning go up or down? Well, in fact, it does both ways. So you can have a negatively charged cloud and positively charged clouds, and they'll produce the opposite effects. So anyway, we talked about that here. I transcribed some videos that are very pertinent. So from there, we go into the next chapter and talk about or reveal how we can get charges from the ground and make circuits and do these various experiments that are very fascinating. Now, initially, I had for sale some of the original neon sign transformers that Don was using in many of his systems. I have the original ones, and then they were changed over by a company, changed names. But then when I bought initially so many of them, and I sold them out, and then they upped the price 3 times, and then said sometime in the future you could get them from us. So I stopped selling them. Unfortunately, I was making this kit. Some of the experiments were using them. So you can still do them with other neon sign transformers, but most of the neon sign transformers have the ground fault circuit that prevents you from doing some of these experiments. So, but I talk about alternatives in this book. So, like for example, you could use an ignition coil and so forth. So you give various experiments and various teachings that lead you then to the full system of the Tesla coil. So this will be chapter 3, where we start talking about the Coram brothers, which predate Don a couple of years at the where Don taught or had his videos were taken. There's other videos that I quote from in this that are foundational and that relate to, well, this is the waveform right here, that relate to the trumpet wave, as we talked about. So this creates a lot of clarification as to what that is. And then I have some various links, because I can't quote everything here, because this is already a 100-page book. It's got many illustrations in it too. So then we show in here what a Tesla coil is not and what it is. So basically, the Tesla coils for the last 100 years, and since Tesla's day, like his early days, even he said they're not done right. And if you go back in the literature, you'll see that the only one in Europe in those early years that had the Tesla coil working properly was his mentor, who he gave the Tesla gave the Tesla coil to, and all the rest were changing it or not understanding the core principles. So we talk about those principles in here, and we can quote from these so-called experts showing you all the sophisticated math on how to build an ultimate Tesla coil, but yet they're missing the key teaching of Tesla, not producing this trumpet wave. Now, so at the end of this book, I introduced the idea of creating the fireballs. I'll give you the references in here, and I show you the system that I had built that was And I leave you guys to find it somewhere in this book. And even for years after I published this book, I had found nobody had built or shown what Don recommended somewhere in this book. So anyway, when you look at this book, you'll understand what I'm getting at with that. So I actually created a fireball just like it was said here, but accidentally. I wasn't expecting it to happen, and it blinded me. I could still see the image, and it could have been it was very serious. It could have killed me. And actually I didn't touch that for a couple of years. Now I've had that model, it was a big model, in some of my videos. I didn't demonstrate it. In fact, I wasn't touching it for a while because of that happening, but it produced so much power. It was just literally an explosion of sorts, but it was a fireball. So we talk about that in here, but we get into what matters, what doesn't matter. And I do want to say at the beginning here, I spent a lot of time in quotation and talking about what is the problem, why are people not succeeding? And what I've found is it's because people have been trained to be prejudiced, to have prejudgment, and they're so accustomed to doing that all day long for their whole lives since their earliest memories. Basically almost everybody is a liar because they are lying to themselves by being dishonest in their research. They're prejudging things all the time. They prejudge other people, they prejudge experiments, and that means either good or bad. They overbelieve or underbelieve. So I've said this in my meetings, the problem with people is in not succeeding is 100% psychological, or you could say spiritual. It all comes down to not having the right methodology of life. You're only as good as your system. The method determines your outcome. If you have a faulty method, even if you accidentally stumble upon something, it's not because of the method, it's by accident. But you might not even know how to interpret what you're seeing. So that's why I'm saying we have to have the right form of education. But prior to content, you have to know how to divide content, and prior to that, you have to be honest. So I have one of my workers who the other day was jumping to a conclusion because he wanted some result. But I had to say, you need to slow down. You have to appreciate the subtle details. So for example, even if you have a result that's not what you wanted, if you are in the habit of discarding that and ignoring it or being frustrated with it, then you're not in the place to do science. You got to be in the context. Like I started out, you need to be in God's context. Without having faith in God and conformity to God and His ways, where are we at? What are we doing? We're fighting against Him. We're not going to understand Him. So in some of my books here that I publish, like from Charles Finney, for example, he said, before you study theology, you must have the same heart as God. Otherwise you're going to misunderstand Him. And then he goes and talks about all the worst people in history. They had actually studied theology, but not having the heart of God. So they misunderstood Him. and they became monsters. So in the same way, if we're going to do science, we got to know God's creation, but we need to be in the right attitude where we're always learning. So what happens is we need to be very curious about all results, and that's the right methodology, first of all. So the opposite of that is confirmation bias again, where you're going out and you're filtering. I mean, we have to filter things all the time because we can't attend to every little detail that comes our way. True. But when we're studying a subject, we need to be open to wherever it leads us, right? But I find so very few people, out of the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that I've met and conversed with in my life, so very few even are aware of being in that mindset. And I'm not saying that I have always been in that mindset. I've had my own sins of that nature in my life. But we're not going to come to the right conclusion unless we adopt the honest or the fruit of the Spirit, God, and we can't do that on our own. We're not, like I said, our own saviors. We need God, then we have His fruit, His character, His virtue. So I started out this book, and actually all three of those books, with that subject. And coming to a place of having confidence in being honest, that you can be content no matter what happens, because you're in God's hands. And so being in that more relaxed state of mind where you're not going to claim to be finished on a subject until you've thoroughly exhausted the matter. It's fine to not exhaust a matter. We can't exhaust many matters. But if we claim to know something when we haven't done sufficient research, then we're dishonest. And this is the way almost everybody conducts themselves. They just opinionize. They've been trained to do that. So the establishment has done that to all of you. You know, some of you might have been homeschooled and had good parents to teach you otherwise. I didn't. And I spent decades and still working through the things that I learned wrong in the schools. So I'm not really concerned if you achieve free energy, but you're not really going to succeed in this or in anything in life until you have the right methodology. So I'm going to end it there. I think I don't know if there'll be anything else that I'll produce in the future. These are pretty thorough, covering a wide range of free energy devices. We'll continue selling what we have, and we'll have other products. I've got several coming down the pipeline. I would like to focus actually on mechanical free energy devices that are not electric, to tell you honestly. And but with all this information, you can produce all the different types of energy that you want. And I think my work is complete. That I never intended to do all this, and here it is. So thank you all for all of you who have supported me in buying products, and I've learned so much from my customers and even YouTube followers many good links to other people. It's been very exciting and profitable. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you later tonight with another video.